Hi, and welcome back to Toka Backstage. I am honored to have the illustrious, amazing BubbleMan with us, Mr. Lewis Pearl. How are you, sir?
I'm good.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you here. We actually have two shows, November 4th, which is a Sunday, I believe, at 2 and 5. We've had you before, and we're just really excited to have you back. I'm curious. I've always wanted to know what inspired you to get into bubbles.
Well, I just saw bubbles. I was in university, and a friend of mine had these toys that made giant bubbles. When I say giant, I mean about 12 to 14 inches. Nowadays, we're making 50-foot long bubbles, but this was 1980. And we were making these 14-inch bubbles. Was the biggest thing I'd ever seen. And we were in between studies in college. We just started playing with bubbles, and it was cold out, so we'd go outside and fill them with hot air and watch them float around at night, shine flashlights at them. And we made movies with bubbles, and we just kind of played around like you do when you're that age. And I just never stopped. I fell in love with the joy of bubbling. So I've been at it now since 1980.
Awesome. And I've always been impressed that there aren't a lot of bubble guys out there. There's a few, but there's not a lot. But you actually not only perform in the States, you also perform like internationally.
More so internationally, actually. Like, for instance, I do the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Scotland, which is the biggest arts festival in the world. And it's 26 days in August, every day. And because of that, I'm really well known in the UK. And the UK has kind of a theater going culture. People go to the theater, and the cities support the theaters. So they really promote family shows. So whenever school's out, I go to the UK and I tour. I do 15 cities in a row sometimes. In fact, in April, that's what I'll be doing. And because of that, also, I get a lot of attention from Asia. So I go to China once a year. I just got back from Hong Kong. I just did a festival in Germany. So I perform more outside of the U.S.
So do you think it really is just the fact that there's more of a theater-going culture in Europe than in the States?
That's my theory, yes. I think people there have been going to the theater for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the cities actually support the theaters. There's arts, there's taxes, and the cities support the theaters. So they have these beautiful, gorgeous theaters in every town. And they can afford to pay the artists. And so there's an arts culture. In fact, theater management is a huge education sector in England. A lot of people study stage management and all kinds of theater management. It's a big area. They definitely have a much bigger theater going culture. Americans, we like TV and movies. And we'll go to the theater. People will go to big stuff, but we don't support the arts in the way that Europe does.
Yeah. And it's funny you talked about like the different theaters around. I'm curious, what's the biggest theater that you've ever performed at?
Well, I will start by saying I prefer smaller venues because when it's that huge, you get a little bit lost. When you know that there's 2,500 people out there. I had a producer in England, and he wanted to turn my show into a giant spectacle, big Broadway-style show. And so he booked me into a theater in New Zealand, which was like a 4,000-seater.
Wow.
Right in the heart of downtown Auckland. And we did pretty well, but it was just, it was like being in an aircraft hangar, I mean, it was much more beautiful, but
yeah.
We had to have huge video screens so that people could see stuff. And so there was a video guy on stage, and it was a little bit daunting. I prefer to feel in my show, I prefer to feel like we're hanging out in my living room. and I can actually be in contact with everyone in the audience in some way.
And I think that's sort of the great thing about, I mean, not to blow our own horn, but at the Armstrong, it's 500 seats, but it actually does feel like an intimate venue because of the rake of the audience. And so people do feel very close to you. And I must say that your demeanor on stage is very welcoming, so that helps as well.
Thank you.
I'm just curious. I mean, most people think of Bubbles and they just think, okay, it's something you give your kids and blow. But having seen your show, there's like so much more that you do with it. Can you what do you hope that people walk away from your shows after they've seen it? What do you want the kids to walk away with?
The kids and the adults, I want them to see that there is just so much that can be done that we never imagined. Because as you say, when people think Bubbles, they think, oh, my 2-year-old likes Bubbles.
Right.
And you just think of 20 or even hundreds of little tiny 1-inch bubbles. And those are fun and they're great to go run around and pop. But in the last 20, 30 years, bubbles have been turned into an art form, you know, and the technology to make them and the chemistry to create the solution has grown exponentially. And so everybody just comes up and goes, I never imagined you could do any of that stuff. Like, you know, one of my favorite things that I do, I call it the Torquay No. And it's a huge, it's about an 18-inch bubble, and it's got a hole in the top of it, and it's got a tornado of stage fog going up from the bottom to the top, like an upside down tornado, and emerging. This fog emerges from the top, so it looks like a volcano. So that's why I call it a Torquay No. And nobody imagines using helium and stage fog and lasers and lights in a bubble. People just imagine lots of bubbles floating around. That's right. Hits people's head. And even though I've been doing this for 38 years, I rarely meet anybody who's ever even heard of a bubble show. It astonishes me because I know that it's a growing field. And I just went to a bubble convention in Wales, and there were 100 of the world's top bubble artists there. And, you know, it's a thing that is going to hit a critical mass at some point, and people will know about it. But at this point, like you said, people just imagine little bubbles. And, you know, when they see a cube bubble or, you know, a rocket bubble, which is a huge bubble filled with fog and helium going up, leaving a trail of fog as it goes up, you know, these people just can't imagine this stuff.
So I'm curious, you know, it's funny, I just was talking to my kids, and I'm curious, when you were growing, I mean, you started in university, and then I imagine at some point you thought, okay, this could be a show. Did your parents ever say, what about law or accounting or?
Actually, they really wanted me to be a doctor, a surgeon. And I decided at the age of 17 that I didn't want to go into that field at all. But it's very curious because I blow bubbles with my hands, and I don't want my hands to get, you know, all messed up by the soap. So I put on surgical gloves. So I start the show with surgical gloves on. And then I'm making these sculptures out of bubbles. And if I take my attention away from the bubble, if I'm in the middle of a bubble and I start thinking, what do I want to have for dinner? The bubble will pop, like right there in front of the entire audience and me. The thing I've been working on just goes away. If I just leave my concentration for 1 second, I don't know why, but that always happens. So I have to focus, and I really feel like a surgeon when I'm working on these bubbles, and I'm putting together sometimes 20, 30, 40 bubbles into a sculpture with moving parts and things. I really feel as if I am a surgeon. I have the same kind of surgical concentration that I'm using. And so, but for me, I didn't start by doing shows. I took this toy, my friend had these toys, and he gave me 100 of them back in university days. Mm-hmm. And about 3 years later, I was living in Berkeley and I needed to get to San Francisco, and it cost 75 cents to get across the bridge. And I realized, oh, I don't have 75 cents. So on that day in 1980, I took my box of 100 bubble blowers out to a public market area in Berkeley on Telegraph Avenue, if you know where that is. Mm-hmm. And I started blowing bubbles and selling these toys. And that's how I got my start. It's just on the street, demonstrating these toys, making big bubbles. And everybody that came by, I just said, you want to try one? You want to try one? And people tried them and they bought them. And pretty soon I had sold 50 of them. I had $100 in my pocket. And, from going from I didn't have anything to $100, that was exciting. And that's how I got my start. And so I got more of these toys, and I got more. I eventually bought the entire company. It had gone defunct, and it was a bankrupt company that made these toys. I bought the company, and I turned that into a business. And eventually I had 147 products and making everything in China. And it was a big toy company, but I was still, because I started on the street demonstrating, I was still doing shows. I was doing lots and lots of shows while running the toy company. And so my father was just very happy that I had a job, period.
It's funny because people don't, God bless them, parents, when kids say, I want to be an actor or a singer or dancer or whatever, they don't always realize that there's so much more than just the art. There's also the business of it. It is show business after all. Mm. So it's interesting to hear how you sort of took, I guess you sort of fell into this by accident because you just needed the money. And yeah. But there's so much more than just the performance aspect. So your toy company, are you still doing that now, or did you move on just to do performing all the time?
Yeah, in 2002, after 9/11, the stock market crashed. And all of my customers, not all, but 85% of my customers were these high-end educational toy stores. They're all gone now, but they were called Nature Company,
oh sure,
Doodles, Zany Brainy, Imaginarium, World of Science, Store of Knowledge. And there were like 10 more of these 100 to 200 store chains around the nation. And they were all kind of science oriented. And so my toys fit into these things. They all went bankrupt after 9/11. The stock market crashed and all these companies went out. And one of my competitors, a bigger toy company from Seattle, they said, oh, we want to buy your company. And I was like, please. I've enjoyed being a businessman, but I'm done. And that was 2002. My company was 22 years old at that time. So it's almost like my toy company had graduated from college and it was time to set it out in the world. So, and I'm very grateful because I'm much happier as a performing artist than I was as a businessman. When the company started and I had one product, it was fun. But at the end, I had 147 products and lots of employees, and I was spending lots of time in China in factories, and it wasn't really fun anymore.
Yeah.
So now I play with toys. It's much better.
Yeah. Amen. So just thinking about your stage performance, is there one thing that has happened to you on stage that was kind of like an embarrassing moment, or what's the craziest thing that happened to you while on stage?
Well, you're working with bubbles and children. I bring children up on stage when I'm doing a family show. So you never know what's going to happen with kids, and you never know what's going to happen with bubbles. So every once in a while, something will get into my bubble solution and it won't work. So this last summer, it doesn't happen all the time, but in 35 years of doing this, it's happened 6 or 7 times. And it happened. The last time was this summer. I was doing a variety show in Edinburgh. You do your regular show, and then there's a whole lot of variety shows, and you kind of go and join in and do 10 minutes. And this was a comedy showcase, packed audience, and I went out and nothing worked. None of my bubbles worked. And, so I tried my best to wing it, but it was a comedy audience, and they're used to nonstop laugh, blah, 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 laugh, blah, 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 laugh. Right. And so that one was no good. the time before, the previous time it happened, I was performing for 220 of the world's top doctors of physics. It was a dinner at the end of a physics convention in Brighton, England. And it was at this beautiful Art Deco building at the end of a pier. And we set up, we had this big dinner, and then it was time for me to perform. And I hadn't tested anything. And the bubbles worked for about a minute, and then nothing worked. But that show was okay because there were all these physicists there, and they just got really, really interested in why the bubbles weren't working. And I had a whole lot of fun. I was able to use comedy, and I got through that half an hour, and it actually was a good show. And then afterwards, a physicist from Japan came up, and he said, "So did you figure it out?" And at that very moment, it just hit me. I was at the end of a pier, and the water I had used to mix my bubble solution went through these PVC pipes down to the end of this pier. And PVC has some kind of, it leaches a chemical that destroys bubbles.
Huh.
And I had learned that because one of my toys, the Bubble Banana, I'd imported 20,000 Bubble Bananas from China, and they didn't work. And I found out it's because the little bubble ring on the end of the banana was made out of PVC. Took me like 6 months to figure that out. So in Brighton, as soon as that guy asked me what went wrong, I realized, oh, I'm at the end of a pier. All the pipes are PVC. So, you know, that's the worst thing that can happen is if the bubbles don't work. And so for now, if I'm going to come to Torquay, I'm going to have a backup bubble solution. Oh.
Well, thankfully you've been there before, so we know that the pipes are at least not PVC.
Yeah, the water works.
It's also kind of interesting because you were talking about the sculptures you make with the bubbles, and so it is an art form, not only a performing art, but actually like a visual art form. Do you ever get disappointed that you've created this beautiful thing on stage, and then it just like within just a fraction of a second, it's all gone because somebody popped it?
No. Well, if somebody pops it, yeah, I'm not too happy with that. But usually there's not somebody up there while I'm performing a show popping my bubbles.
Right.
You know? I bring kids up and I want them to pop the bubbles, but that's only a small section of the show. When I'm making these sculptures and I'm putting all this effort into it, there's not a person popping it. But at the end, they're all gone. Every bubble is gone. And I love that because it's so much about being in the moment. And working with bubbles, it's like those monks, those from Tibet, who make those sand sculptures, you know, these beautiful mandalas out of sand, and they take like 5 days to make this thing, and on the 6th day they just wipe it out. It's the same kind of thing. It keeps you in the moment. It's about the making of the bubbles. It's not about keeping anything, and it's a great lesson in life, actually.
You know, it really is, because it all, I mean, it kind of goes to speak to, you know, the memory. You have the memory of it and the pride of creating it, but also for an audience, it goes to the fact that every performance is different.
Oh,
I mean, you know, that's one of the beauties of live theater. It's like you never know what's going to happen in front of you, just as like you don't know. It's like you could walk out on stage and, like you said, somebody could have switched all the theater pipes to PVC, and you've got an audience expecting something, and you've got to, you know, create something out of that. Yeah,
you never know. I was just in Hong Kong, and in Hong Kong, it's extremely. I was there in September, and it was about 90 degrees, but incredibly humid, and everybody lives in air conditioning at that time of year over there. And of course, if I'm doing a bubble show in a theater and the air conditioning is on, the whole show will blow away. So that's a big problem I have in a lot of climates. You know, I have to say no air conditioning. And the theater said, forget it. The audience will melt. So we worked out a deal where there'd be air conditioning on for the first 30 minutes of the show, and then they turn it off for the last 30 minutes of the show. But what happened one day, and there's air conditioning on stage and air conditioning in the audience, and the air conditioning on stage was supposed to be off. But this one day they messed up, and it was the air conditioning on stage that was on. And my whole show was blowing away the whole time. And so I had to completely change the show and make it into almost this comedy show of me doing a bubble show while all the bubbles were blowing away. And, you know, I adjusted. You just have to adjust. If you're on stage, it was a sold-out show, 420 people, you know, I had to adjust, and they loved it. And I loved it. It was fun. It was a learning experience.
Yeah, and it goes back to just the thought, or I guess the culture of going to the theater, how, you know, not a lot of Americans, there's a certain percentage of Americans that don't go to the theater, but they should, because they're missing out on that true live experience. Not to mention the fact that you get to, it's a communal process where you get to really enjoy the time with other people. And your show is so fun because it is so interactive. I mean, you have the kids up on stage, you know, you have a lot of wow factor to your show, because people just, like you said earlier, they don't know that bubbles can really do everything that you show that they can do.
Yeah. Was there a question in there?
No, I was just complimenting you. Okay. I also have to point out that beautiful poster behind you, the Black Pearl and her accordion.
Yes.
We were lucky enough last year to have her, but I know that she's too busy this year to come out, but please tell her she will be missed.
I will definitely tell her that. Thank you.
Well, we're about out of time, so I just want to say thank you for taking the time to chat with us today, or with me, and I really look forward to seeing you on November 4th.
Me too. I very much look forward. I quite enjoyed it last time. It was a great audience down there, very exciting and happy and alive.
Well, yeah, we'll provide the same audience for you again, and we know that you'll provide a great show. So hopefully people won't miss it. Tickets are still available at torrancearts.org or calling the box office. So thank you, Louis, and we will see you soon.
All right, Chris. Take care.